Hi, I am Erika T. Wurth, author of the Indigenous literary horror novel White Horse, which is out now with Flatiron Macmillan. And it is about Carrie, who is an urban Indian woman who loves heavy metal and loves horror, but despises her mother because she believes that her mother abandoned her when she was 2 days old. And when her cousin Debbie discovers an ancient bracelet of her mother's, and Carrie touches the bracelet, her mother's ghost begins to haunt Carrie, and a monster invades her dreams. And Carrie decides that she needs to find out what happened to her mother after all. And some of the inspiration for this novel is urban Indian life in Denver, Colorado. And it's also just, my love of heavy metal and horror, which was something where I went to school in Idaho Springs, people loved. And it's also a love song to old Denver.
Welcome to another episode of Dead Headspace. I'm your host, Patrick R. McDonough, joined always by my friend, Brennan LaFaro. Say hello, Brennan.
Hello, everybody.
And my other friend, Erika Robbins. Say hello, Erika. But today we're going to call her something different because our guest is also named Erika. What are we referring to you today as?
Just going to call me E to keep it nice and simple.
Say hi, E.
Hello.
And today we're talking with the wonderful... nailed it. We're talking with the wonderful Erika T. Wurth, author of White Horse. Say hello. Are we calling you Erika?
Yes, call me Erika.
Say hello, Erika.
Hello.
What got you into horror?
It's funny because I actually was on some other podcast. I can't even remember it now because it's been such a whirlwind the last few months, but we were talking about this and what our gateways were. And in some ways, like, I was really just a classic nerd, it was probably fantasy initially. Like, I loved elves. I loved, portals to other worlds, like anything like that. And I still do. But after a while I started reading horror, and then I started reading science fiction. And then, and of course, I had a long Stephen King period, like all of us, right? Like, I was just like, oh my God, the Stephen King guy, my God. And I would read anything paranormal, especially, right? And then I got to college and I got to PhD school, and they just ironed it out of me. It was just like, oh, if you're a serious writer, you don't write this stuff. And I really internalized it. Like, I thought I was this like strong personality. But I remember saying, I want to write my thesis on Stephen King, and I just laughed out of the room. And I did. I started, teaching creative writing and writing and publishing, and all of my books were quite dark. But I wouldn't read quote unquote genre. And then I started reading it again. And let me know if this is too long-winded and you want to get into more of this later. But
No.
I started, keep going. Okay, or stop.
No, please keep going. Keep going.
I missed it terribly. I missed the elves. And I started reading fantasy again. I was reading Lev Grossman, and I started reading science fiction. I read Rendezvous with Rama, and I was like, oh my God, And then I finally started letting myself read horror again. And it was just magical because I have kind of a dark background. I love The Shining. I was just watching it before the show. And I love the book as well. And, my father was white. He was an alcoholic. Sometimes he would say kind of racist things. It was painful. I had a very mixed class and race background or cultural background. A lot of natives don't like the word race because they're citizens of particular nations, and that's cool. But that serious literature did appeal to me at a certain point, right? But what horror allowed me to do was take all of that dark material that I've been writing about, that I'd experienced, and kind of get some of that magic back, but in an adult way that really fit me. And it's not to say that I wouldn't write fantasy or I wouldn't write science fiction someday, but I have to say horror just is a good fit for me. It's just deeply satisfying on some level. So
I am very curious. How do you think that, for lack of better words, taking a break from genre and almost forcing yourself into a literary circle impacted how your writing is now versus if you had allowed yourself to just feel it the whole way through?
So I would always say, like, this is what I say to my students, and I even like have a lecture that I've done at certain, like, literary spaces, which is pulling from every genre. So in other words, what I love about speculative literature is overused as the word is that it's so great at world building. Like, if you can build the kind of world that you'll see in Asimov's work, right? You can build the world of like Wichita, Kansas in 1930, right? So that's something to take from. I also have to say the crime writers, they're freaking great at plot. They structure, they know what they're doing. And if you're having problems with that, read that. I will admit, I think everyone should read really great literary fiction because, right, they care about language, they care about depth of theme, they care about dialogue, inner monologue, depth of characterization, complex characterization rather. So all of that stuff is stuff I don't regret reading, and I think everyone should read. Right? I think we should all be like, we like our genre, but we read outside for a variety of reasons. But sometimes I regret it because I went into academia because it seemed like the most viable route. But there are times in which I'm like, you know what? Maybe I would have been happier writing kids' books on the side and trying screenplay in LA. But I think you could have regrets about anything. I will say what I do like about it is I've learned what I do want to take away from it and what I don't want to take away from it. And they can be extremely, the word is squeamish about reading anything that isn't literary. And again, they don't even seem to know what literary is. They just, if you ask them, if you push them, they'll say, well, it's good, it's quality. And if you push them, they'll be like, oh, it's language. And so that's what I know I don't want to be. I don't want to be fearful and squeamish, and I don't want to not read and write the things that I really love. So I know I've got the things that I love, right, that I think are skill sets that I pulled for them, but there are also things that I'm like, that's exactly why I'm not there anymore. So yeah.
You know what? We had put up a post earlier about see if anybody had a question to throw at you, and you answered some of them, but you did it in 240 characters or less. So I'm going to give you a little more room here. Brian Macaulay, who is just one of the nicest people in horror and a hell of a writer too. He says, White Horse rocks, and he is also curious to hear what the literary horror label means to you and whether you still feel free to explore other genres you love, like sci-fi and fantasy, in future work.
Yeah, I think he's not just like, I can't wait to read his book and it's killing me. It's like sitting there glowing on my TBR, right? But that's like, damn it, and he's such a funny guy. He's just like very funny and like
He's
punchy. And I just, yeah, and he's just nice, and he's supportive. So, and I love that question because I think that I've noticed people, like I said on the thread, I've noticed people in horror can get really like about that label. And like I said, I think it's because it's been used against them. Like, oh, it's not literary. And I think the thing to remember is the thing that I ask people in quote unquote literary, which a better word for it is either realism or drama or postmodernism, right? If they really like this kind of like clever aesthetic that's like kind of choppy, anti-narrative, is okay, what is literary? And if they can't define it, then you can say it is depth of theme, complex characterization, and attention to form and language. And you can apply that to anything. And I think commercial fiction is just, if it's purely commercial, it's meant to entertain. But you can do both. You can do, like, for example, Stephen Graham Jones. I have a conversation with him next week, which is what I was trying to refer to in my jumbled way to Brian. I have a conversation with him next week at Tatter Cover. And he's postmodern in form because he's completely anti-narrative. He's literary because he's heavy investment in language, but he's absolutely a horror writer. So right, he's in the genre of horror, and the rules of realism, right, are the rules of the world as we know them are the rules. And Stephen suspends that. He's got the witches. He's got elk, vengeful elk, right? Elk creatures, magical elk creatures, right? So he does kind of a lot of things. So he's like a perfect example of somebody who like is crossover in a number of ways. And you could argue that he's also commercial because he's been a New York Times bestseller. So I think you can only pull from all the things that you love, figure out who you are as a writer, right? And then try to just kind of funnel that into what you do in the best way you can.
My favorite author for, if we're gonna say, um, oh my God, you said literary, right?
Right.
Sorry, brain fart. Yeah, anyways, my favorite one, and I talk about him all the time, is Peter Straub. He definitely fits that narrative of everything you just said. But before we got off track, I wanted to say you talked about Isaac Asimov, and he's got a forward. I'm just trying to show you in the video. He's got a forward in a 1968 anthology, Harlan Ellison's Dangerous Visions, and that was, for anyone that hasn't read it, it's sci-fi, and it's a stepping stone for anthology, so it's definitely worth. It's not really horror, but it's absolutely worth a read. Erika, why don't you? Sorry, E, why don't you take us away?
Sure. Well, you just mentioned the tattered cover in Denver. I like screamed out loud because I've only been to Denver once. So I was like, there's no way I'm going to recognize anything she's writing about. The only thing I wanted to do when I was out there was go to that bookstore. So I just wanted to comment on how cool that was to actually see it in the book. But then speaking of historic Denver, I know you've talked about this on other podcasts, so feel free to skip over this question if you're like, nah, I'm sick of answering this. But I was just curious if writing about historic Denver was kind of like you making a little time capsule in your own story to make sure those things aren't forgotten.
Yeah, I mean, look, all cities change, change is just part of life. But I guess in my brief time in this earth, that is the greatest mug ever.
Wait, what was it?
Oh shoot, I said thank you, but I was muted. It's got little bats on it.
It's a big mug.
It is.
That's great. Yeah, it was like that because I grew up right outside of Denver. And we went all the time. And the old tattered cover was in Cherry Creek, right, which is so opulently fancy and expensive now. And it was just this in like wonderland. There's no other way of putting it, especially when you're like 12 and you just want your dork books, right? So I'd go with my dad, and we'd walk up just countless sets of ginormous stairs. I can't even describe to you the size of these sections of each part of it. And I'd sit there for hours, looking at these books that my dad may or may not buy me, right? Like trying to read as fast as I could. And then the new ones are so cool. The new one on Colfax is great. And yeah, especially the White Horse. The White Horse is an Indian bar. It started in 1930. It became kind of an Indian bar, I guess, in the 50s or 60s. And it's a real bar. And it's one of these places that, yes, it's a bar, but it's also was this Native American like crossroads for generations. Like every Native I meet in Denver, if they're from this area at all, will be like, oh my God, one time I rescued a baby from there. Like it's just this bar. And I remember I was going there with my partner for a couple of years before it closed down. Finally, it's so sad. But it was just like exactly like you see it in the novel. It's just this sort of charming, decrepit, abandoned place that you just knew was right on the precipice of disappearing. So yeah, I wanted to show a little bit because it's set in 2016 of the Denver, like right before boom, real gentrification. So yeah.
That bar, it's not crumbling, it's still in existence, but it reminded two things. It reminded me of my dad would always go to the VFW in my hometown in Massachusetts, and like I was in my young 20s, and there's not, that's not a place you're gonna pick up girls. I liked it because there weren't like a lot of people there. Me and you like the same type of music. I think you probably are more on the heavier side, but I'm big into rock and roll from the 60s and 70s. And like I could just play that, have beer, be close to home, play pool, and then call it a night, And I just wanted to comment on like time changing. I read about my hometown too, because last time I walked there, it was weird. Like I live in South Jersey now and have for years, but the playground I grew like as a kid played on, it's literally like they demolished everything. There's a fence around where it was. There's houses everywhere. There used to be a big, huge wooded area where the kids used to play. And I grew up in the 90s, so it's fun because like didn't have phones and all that shit. We would just stay out all day and all night. It's different, and it's only 20 years. So 2016, that's still, I mean, a lot can happen in that time. So I'm curious. The little we've talked about White Horse, this is a two-parter. First off, I'd like it if you could give us the elevator pitch for those that haven't read it, but I'm curious, what's the most how do I word this? What's the most cherished? It could be a scene, it could be a character, a dialogue. What is the most, if you had to focus on one aspect, what's the most cherished thing of that book for you? So elevator pitch and then cherished whatever.
Yeah, let me sort of wind into all those things. Yeah, the elevator is right. It's indigenous literary horror, and I am always really flattered when people compare me to Stephen Graham Jones, but I like the more traditional structure. But I do have these, as you know, like poetic flashbacks. So essentially, the longer log line, right, is Carrie's an indigenous woman of mixed Mexican Indian and American Indian heritage, and then she's also white, and she's very urban. Her family's extremely urban, like mine, been urban for generations, and she despises the mother she thinks abandoned her right when she was 2 days old, until her super sweet, well-intentioned white cousin Debbie finds her mother's bracelet, and it's also a family heirloom. It's kind of magical. She touches it, her mother's ghost starts haunting her, including like a sort of an evil Bigfoot type guy named Lofa. He's called Lofa, and she decides she has to find out what happened to her mother after all. But yeah, I think I would say that I do like heavy metal in the sense that like I grew up with it, but when you're talking about the VFW, you are talking about kind of like that same kind of dive bar, Indian bar, like those gritty kind of places where we grew up. And what you're talking about, like CCR, all that stuff, that's classic Native music. Like everyone's dad and all that. Oh God, it's so great, right? And I still love it to this day. And they always played it in the White Horse. And I have to admit, when I was growing up, I probably was more of an indie rock and hip hop guy, but I came back around to liking heavy metal over time because I could see what it was doing. And it appealed to me. Yeah.
Sorry to interject, but I just want to say, to add on top of that, how the VFW and the White Horse in my head are kind of like an amalgamation of that scene. There was just like old townies there, and some of them were, veterans. Most of us weren't, but they would just talk about like things how it was before I was alive or when I was young. So like that's what your bar that you just conceived. I had the one that I grew up with literally throughout my whole childhood, because it was across this massive baseball field where kids would go there and have pizza and shit, but like the parents would also drink, and then I drank there. And I love when books do that. Like I got to explore your world and not even on purpose have kind of mine hold hands with yours. And books like that last longer in my heart than, others.
Yeah, I think that the thing I was going to say about, it's so crazy when as you get older, even when you're just in your 20s and then 30s, 40s, beyond, these places that you were that are like decimated, it's your way of processing you getting older, your mortality, and also your sense of like, oh, this whole, world and this whole universe, like it changes rapidly and it's wild, right? But I think that, I think for me, I think that the more specific you can be with your universe and your book, the more people are going to kind of, see themselves in it, just because there's going to be that human level of attachment, right? And I think too, if you can, like, I always say to my creative writing students, like, look, I understand you want to be universal, but it's almost like when you try and you're abstract instead of concrete, it's like trying to make someone happy by yelling, be happy at them, and they're just going to be scared. Whereas if you're like, hey, there are free turkey sandwiches in Simpkins 204, they're going to be happy because that's specific. But yeah, I'm trying to think of the most cherished. I think in some ways the darker scenes are less the scary scenes. And on some level, I do kind of perversely cherish them, or the poetic flashbacks, because that's the death of me as a poet, is those scenes, those flashbacks where the main character is thinking back on this character that she feels super guilty about because the character OD'd. And there's just something I think it's probably the wrong answer, but I think about who I was as a poet, and those are the death throes. And so, and it's what makes it a non-traditional narrative novel in some ways. So I have some tenderness around them, those scenes.
Well, that to me that says like that. Well, that's why it makes your voice unmatched because no one can write like you if you're actually writing like yourself. So that's why only you could write White Horse. So I don't think that's the wrong answer. No, I respectfully disagree. Brennan, you want to go or E? Can't call you E,
I'll
but I'm
throw in
going
real
to.
quick. I think it's funny that you kind of started that off, Erika, with I don't know if this is the right answer. I mean, how could it be the wrong answer if it's what you kind of want to shine a light on, so to speak. Now, one of the things that I kind of wanted to ask about was the character's choice in music and if that kind of revolved over to you, and then you showed up in a fucking Slayer shirt. So I didn't ask that question, but I am curious about how that kind of love of metal, like if you feel like whether it's the music or the lyrics impact your writing style at all.
That's a great question. I think, like I said earlier, metal is all around me, and Megadeth and Slayer and Metallica were king. Obviously, my main character likes metal and understands metal better than I do, if that makes any sense. And I was kind of an indie hip hop guy just because I was so internal and weird, and I want to go to college, and so I was like reading dork books under the display case to get away from people at lunch. So I found metal to be like kind of like, oh, it's too much, and these guys who are like, oh yeah, and I just was like, oh Lord God, but I came around to it because I think it was just everywhere, and I came to understand there was like a dead piece that I'd given to the New York Times. They were interested, and then they didn't ultimately take it, and it's essentially about like I kind of understood over time why the people around me had loved it so much beyond just the time of it. It was because you have to be a virtuoso to play metal. Precisely what I love about indie hip hop and indie alternative rock in general is that it's a bit DIY. And I'm not saying they don't have their geniuses. Of course they do. But you have to be a fucking genius to play guitar like that. The lyrics like of Metallica are like they're great hooks. Megadeth he's just a fucking weirdo. Dave Mustaine is a weirdo. That I went to go see them play recently, and I was like, I'm not sure anyone plays guitar like this. And the dude actually writes for music magazines on his technique because it's honestly that unique. And I started to, once you kind of get away from that like extreme level of noise and cacophony and rage, and you start to see what they're doing, you can see why it's so emotionally cathartic, and you can see why it's so brilliant, and you can see why these guys back home and these women too, and everyone, however they probably would identify now, were like, I love this stuff because I want to believe I'm going to get out too, and I want to believe I'm exceptional too. But yeah, so it probably has affected my writing because I wanted to repeat some of the rage, desperation, and passion and skill too. Yeah, that I felt like I eventually really did see with heavy metal.
That's awesome. So on the topic of heavy metal, I gotta ask, do you have a favorite band?
It is definitely Megadeth, and it's funny because my boyfriend's like, he'd actually put that in his novel. I think I'd talked about it, like, oh gosh, that's the one heavy metal band I have to admit I kind of like. And I think it influenced him, but now he's like, no, you took it from me. And I'm like, look, buddy. But I actually really like them, whereas he's like, bleh, but I love Megadeth. Like I genuinely listen to it a lot. But I have to admit, Metallica does have these like kind of great hooks. But look, I'm at heart, I'm kind of a Pearl Jam, Nirvana guy, the Chronic, you know what I mean? And I love like people like MC Solar, so yeah. Or Mr. Kitty for that matter.
I gotta ask, Geronimo. We're not gonna say how he plays a role. If this is a spoiler, let me know and I will cut it out. But why Geronimo? Was he a particular influence in anything in your life, or did it just make sense for the story?
Probably both. I mean, I'm of Chickasaw, Apache descent. My family, that section went up and down from the United States to Mexico traditionally. And then they ended up in these boxcars in northern Mexico in the mountains. And then Porfirio Diaz was kind of in the pocket of the American government and was driving out the pockets of those folks. Some, my relatives, some stayed, some were able to escape, I guess. I wish I knew more. Some got out, ended up in Texas. And I think they intermixed with Irish folks. That's why one of my great grandfather's names is Riggs. Like great. And then they married into Chickasaw, and then they married into white Cherokees. And my Chickasaw family is also Black or African descent. And then my Chickasaw ancestor really loved them because they were like her ex-husband's people. Once she even divorced him because she married lots of people. And her husband's name was John Wesley Riggs, I guess. But even when she divorced John, which I don't think their marriage was particularly long enough to have a baby, she would go down into these boxcars in Mexico. And supposedly she participated in the Mexican Revolution, which I really love. I hope that story is true.
That's cool.
And so, yeah, sure. But I think in the end, Geronimo, although arguably is a very distant relative of mine, because he's also Chiricahua, and that's my band of Apache, he's just a mythic figure. He's like Crazy Horse, right?
You know, or Tecumseh.
Like, yes, exactly.
Seriously, they're like just untouchable.
Well, and see, the main character, like romantic love, is absolutely anathema to her. Absolutely not. She will not do that. But Geronimo, part of the biggest wound of his life, so Carrie, it was her best friend growing up. One of Geronimo's wounds was there were Mexican soldiers that killed his first wife and children, and he never forgot it. It drove him for the rest of his life. So I was also really fascinated by that, and also by the idea that supposedly he had these sort of magical skill sets, arguably, supposedly. So, and since I'm a speculative writer, it was compelling for me.
That makes sense. E.
Sure. So I have another question, and it may be a little too similar to Pat's, so we can, again, skip it if we need to. But again, just listening to you on other podcasts, I thought it was really interesting that, well, I should specify the two I listened to. It was Talking Scared and Terrifying Tomes of Terror. I listened to both of those today to get ready for this recording. I really like how both of those hosts commented on your ability to write like really, really good, gritty reality stories. Obviously mixed with the paranormal and spooky stuff, which is always great. But you definitely don't shy away from going into darker topics. So I was just curious if there's a particular scene or element of White Horse that you wrote and you sat there thinking, I really hope readers feel this one.
Yeah, I definitely wanted, when the character is kind of having to take accountability for how she's treated her cousin. It's a terrible moment for her because even though she's strong enough to be like, oh, okay, yeah, okay, that is on me, right? It's still painful because if you love someone, and this is probably one of the she has very few figures in her life, like very few people that she loves. To realize you kind of taken them for granted for decades is a miserable thing. So I was hoping people would feel that. And then on the more speculative level, yeah, look, some people have said that it's not scary at all. Sorry, Erika, it's just not terrifying for me. It's not frightening for me. And then some people have said that it is. And I worked on that really hard because I was new to this and I wanted to evoke that. I think that's a compelling emotion. I think it's kind of the core of horror. And I mean, we could probably go on for hours about why it's valuable. Is it valuable? What it does, why it defines the genre. But I actually started looking at films, right? Books are of course primary, but I wanted to see on a visceral, easy visual level, like what scared me and why. So I started like writing down, okay, this scared me. This is why it scared me. This is what happened. And I thought about, someone actually pointed this out the other day. Paranormal Activity, and The Conjuring. These are just some of my favorite. I could watch them
Ooh.
compulsively, right? Again and again. I just love the book. I love the way they're built. I love the art of A, subtlety, and B, slowness. Because that's when you're actually scared. When someone's like, roar, I'm like, I'm not scared, or like, meh, meh. I'm like, ew, but I'm not like profoundly frightened. And I know it's kind of, I think it's funny because in the horror community, people are really into the slasher and they're really into body horror and really into this stuff. But that to me is not profoundly frightening. It's more like, oh, gross, or whoa, or run, or like it's fun. But like to profoundly wonder, would this creature eat my soul? Where would my soul go? Even if it's entirely speculative, that is terrifying. That is actually frightening. So I guess I get such a kick out of that. Like I can't help it. It's a fantasy geek in me that wants to go back to those portals where elves live. And are they evil elves? Are they goblins? I'm always going to be compelled by that stuff. And so, yeah, I worked very hard on writing scary scenes, whether they scare people or not. So,
Yeah, I mean, everyone's got their own fears, so you're not going to please everyone. Um, it's well written. It's a good story, but all right. So this next part, just tell me if you want me to cut this. Sensitive to some, not for others. I know I gotta say this just for someone that might be like, well, he did this or that. Just the way we live, the world we live in now. Is the word Indian inappropriate for, and I know it's different for everyone. Is it inappropriate for non-indigenous people to use? Because I might slip up and say that. I just wanted to hear your opinion. I can't remember what we talked about. We talked about this off air, but we talked about something similar to this with Wagishi Grice. And I personally feel like it's really important we trust him, we trust you. So we listen to people that we trust. And it's important to hear what you guys get to say because that's how you make connections and make bridges to understand. And ultimately, isn't that what we read books for? So you can understand and hopefully have some peace with people.
yeah, I think what you're doing is very primary. First of all, if you were like, wow, you're the only native I've ever read, then I think you're like, like Nito, then that's the problem right there. You've already, in my mind, it really doesn't matter because you've already solved the problem, which is you respect the art, you respect that Native people are capable of it, that we're all doing it differently, we all have different opinions on that. And you've had Wob, right? There's a bunch of us now. There's V Castro, there's Shane Hawk, there's so obviously Stephen Graham Jones. And I think that's what's so cool. I think people are finally getting to that point, and that's all that matters to me. Every single Native would disagree about that. I was called really derogatory versions of that, of being Indian, like when I was younger, and I'm not even going to say them because they're that viscerally gross. But I will say, like, everyone disagrees. Like, if you ask my partner, he's like, Indians say Indian. If you ask people in Canada, they will not say that. That is absolutely a slur as far as I have been able to tell. Now, I'm sure they would disagree with one another. They disagree a lot, but we all disagree. But, they tend to say things like First Nations, right?
That's what Wob said. He said First Nations. I forget what the specific tribe is. I don't even know if that's the right word.
Yeah, no, a lot of people, some people don't like that word. Some people don't. I mean, look, when natives are around one another in the States, it probably depends on where you're at. Like Navajos or Diné. And if you're in Dinétah, they'll be like, hey, what tribe are you? But they are probably not going to use the word Indian. In Oklahoma, we use it. In Denver, we use it. In South Dakota and North Dakota, we use it. In Canada, I rarely hear it used. It is derogatory. And it really depends. Some people think of Native American as very academic. That's why my boyfriend doesn't like it, because he thinks it's just too clean and academic, and it doesn't really describe how we talk to one another. The word skin has gone out of fashion, but sometimes they'll be like, yeah, man, he's a skin, which is, an old, probably is a riff off of, bad word. But I've heard it used. It's gone out of fashion, but you know what I mean? Like everyone disagrees Like some white people, like you point out that they're white and they cry, they get angry. Some white people are like, I'm white. Some people are like, I prefer Caucasian. Like, like that's cool. Like
Yeah.
I will call you a Caucasian if you want. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
some people are like, look, I'm Greek and I'm proud of that. So I think that's a thing. And then obviously natives like disagree. Some people will talk about since we're sovereign nations, a series of sovereign nations, we should be referred to in that way. A lot of people in Mexico, though, I do not believe they have been granted sovereignty, as far as I know, maybe bits and pieces in the law. And so a lot of indigenous people in Mexico will get over here and be like, I'm indigenous, right? And yet it's so obvious. And like, how how can you not qualify that as a race? You know what I mean? Like, so this is a complicated, really quite miserable issue that I think that there are people, as you know, in my community who want to exploit people's ignorance and actually desire to do the right thing by trying to refine it all into something like that's like either or. There's these authentic Indians and you can tell why, and you should only listen to us and we should be the only ones and the only voice.
Hmm.
And for me, that's exactly what Alexi did. He was a predator of another kind, but I do think it's predatory behavior to try to winnow it down into it's only me. I'm the only one who can tell you. And you can tell who we are by these defined things. Like, no, we're human beings with complicated situations from Alaska to the tip of South America.
It's
So I feel like,
egotistical.
yeah, we're all gonna have a different answer. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's why I said it in the beginning. And I think it's important, especially, I want to flat out say, especially as a white guy, a straight white dude, like I'm a cis white guy. I think it's important that other people hear me ask that because it really rubs me the wrong goddamn way when we can't even ask a fucking question. I'm not saying ask something like, why is the N word wrong or something that's obvious stuff. Obviously, that stuff don't talk. Those are obvious. But like with this, we should be able to talk about it. But if you do it on platforms like Twitter, where it's like text
I
based,
know.
you don't see the people how they react. There's a lot of unstable people on there that'll twist everything. My whole roundabout way of saying that I think it's important that we talk about this, and this is why I like not just focusing on books because books are made by people and people are made of a lot of colors, I don't mean that by skin color. That would have come off wrong. I mean, a lot of colors, a lot of layers. Um, and, and this kind of actually pulls me back to, I want to go back. Don't make me lose track of the question about indigenous folks with interviewing. That's the important thing that we talked about before recording and that I would like to come back to. But something that White Horse really opened my eyes up to, and it might be obvious to a lot of other people, but you cover how there is all different kinds of Native Americans, and for my people, I mean, I'm Irish, Italian, Scottish, other stuff, but there's Irish that moved to I want to say it's Guatemala. There's Puerto Rico. Yeah, Puerto Rico. One of my friends is actually there right now. There's super white Puerto Ricans. In Mexico, he was telling me that the further away you get from Mexico City, they have a different look than in Mexico City. And then in your book, White Horse, you talk about how there's Black Indians and how they were treated poorly. How there's if you're brown, then you're going to be treated poorly. I think that's really interesting, and I haven't read that in another book. And I'm from the East Coast, never even been close to your side of the world, and it's just stuff that I never thought of. And call it whatever you want, privilege or whatever, but I think that's important to talk about because a cop or whoever sees, a brown indigenous person, you're gonna get treated like shit for two different reasons. So I'd like to know if you want to talk about any personal experience or anything that kind of made you really want to focus on that because it seemed like that was all designed on purpose and you had a really powerful reason for talking about that. So is there any commentary that you want to talk
Let
about?
me, let me collapse it down basically. Like if you read Wobb's on The Moon of the Crusted Snow, the reason why everyone's Anishinaabe or white is because that's a reservation in Canada that's fairly isolated, right? And so
Such a
traditionally,
good book.
right? God, I know that's
Sequel.
definitely
The
got a.
sequel's coming out soon.
I know, I'm excited. But yeah, if you that's that community, right? And those folks have a very specific history and way. And if you talk to people in Guatemala, right, you're talking about oftentimes people who are Mayan, they still speak Mayan, and different parts of Mexico. And then, in DF or Mexico City, this is a very cosmopolitan area, right? So you're going to have like loads of people from different parts of the world and Mexico coming in. Denver is like that too. It's certainly not Mexico City, but it's a big, extremely bustling, now just gentrifying city with an extremely brutal history when it comes to Native Americans. So traditionally, right, you have the Ute, the Shoshone, the Cheyenne, I believe the Arapaho, right? And I actually have a room in Meow Wolf, Denver, the convergence station, if you know what Meow Wolf is, that sort of starts to encapsulate that, but in a cool, future-y kind of way. And in any case, the history of Colorado, they were particularly brutal. It was all about like brutally, um, you know, cleaning people out, genocide at any cost. You have things like the Sand Creek Massacre, which is incredibly hard to read about. It happened like just a few miles past here. My cousin, who's different tribes, he was adopted. He's a Black Native. He's Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Nez Perce. Some of his ancestors, relatives, like obviously died brutally, horribly at that site. But because it's such a crossroads in the middle of the country, in the middle of all these different parts of Indian country, people coming up from Mexico, in Texas, into Colorado for work, people coming, Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, coming in from South Dakota and North Dakota. I met what we called at the time Chippewa people, who are now Anishinaabe, right? That's their word. Dene people or Navajo people coming in for work. Every once in a while, someone from the Northwest, right, would filter in. That was much, much, much more rare. So I grew up with Okie mixes, who are like Choctaw, but white looking, completely white passing, not light like me, like just white passing. Dene, who are like, it's a kind of a goofy phrase. It's not useful in some ways, but full-blooded Mexican indigenous people. And I was kind of a mix, right? Dad was white. I'm some Mexican indigenous. I'm a Black Chickasaw. I'm a white Cherokee. And, I met people who were connected to the tribes they descended from. I met people who weren't. And it created a kind of urban Indian culture. And that's a kind of culture that my family and other families have been a part of in Chicago, in Minneapolis, in Winnipeg, in Houston, in Dallas, right? In different parts of Mexico that I don't even really understand, for generations. And it's a culture that is at least somewhat acknowledged. A version of that called the Métis exists in Canada. It is not acknowledged here. It is literally just, you are from a reservation, you have family on the rolls, and maybe they move to the city, versus no, you're not Native at all. And so what I wanted to do in Whitehorse was be like, that is not the reality of my life. That is not the reality of so many lives that I know. And a lot of Chicanos and Chicanas have said, why do we not have this Métis status like a lot of Métis have in Canada, where in Canada there's First Nations and then there's urban Indians, right? For lack of a better, for trying to shorten the conversation or explanation as shortly as I can, urban Indians who the government tracked. They did not track them as often here. And so, because, right, they were afraid they were really Mexican or really Black. And so they didn't want, to let people claim to be urban Indian. And they wanted to tax them, right? And if you wanted to tax someone, they had to be white. And so on the reservation, they were Indian. Off, they were not, even though that was not the reality. And so I wanted to show that urban Indian culture exists in this country and has for a long time, So, yeah.
Yeah. True. There's a lot to break down there, but you talk about reservations a lot, and I love history. For those that are interested in it, you probably heard of the Trail of Tears. Andrew Jackson, I'm going to be very careful with my words. He is one of the most fascinating presidents, but he's also a crazy motherfucker. He adopted an indigenous boy, but the reason is I believe he killed that boy's parents, and he was kind of put in a weird position where that was the way to go. But he's the one that led that. I believe it was Jackson, but
What
was
it
it?
was, like, people were like, hated Indians. No, he was just, I mean, probably, but he was just very Trump-like. So what he wanted to do was, like, all of his rich friends were like, we want the land that they're on, and this land in the South is like great for plantations. So he's like, okay, let's get all these Indians either A, to relinquish their citizenship as natives. So, oh, you can stay in Arkansas, but you no longer have your land.
Hmm.
Or you can go to Oklahoma. You can go on this brutal, brutal trip, and we'll escort you there because the savage Apaches and Comanches are going to potentially, hurt you because you're kind of assimilated now. But if you die along the way, sorry, not our problem, right? And then there's this promise of this land in Oklahoma. But Jackson was just trying to give money to his land and money to his buddies.
Yeah,
So,
he was a piece of shit. I just looked it up. 60,000 people that he moved, and I don't remember how many died, but it's stuff like that that isn't taught in regular school. And another thing, because Brennan, Erika E, and myself are from New England. Brennan and I grew up right near Plymouth, so I know I'm fascinated by the Wampanoag people, and King Philip's War is the bloodiest per capita, and I'm not. This isn't from memorization. I had to look it up to remember, but it says in terms of population, King Philip's War was the bloodiest conflict in American history. It's also known as like the first Indian War. 52 English towns were attacked, a dozen were destroyed. More than 2,500 colonists died, perhaps 30% of the English population of New England. That's pretty much just like a cliff note in a town that's like 30 minutes away from Plymouth. That's fucking crazy. The stuff that we aren't taught as young kids,
oh yeah,
I think it's absolutely batshit crazy.
yep,
And the
half the
fact
page in my, yep.
and the fact that like now there's the ability to hear from people that we couldn't previously. Like I would have never heard of most of the people, even white people that I know and read now because of the internet. And I think it's really important for everyone that hadn't gotten a chance to say what they wanted, because I learned a lot from White Horse. So I'm going to shut the fuck up. Brennan or E, do you have anything to throw into this?
I know you mentioned that we were talking earlier before we started recording, and one thing that Erika said that I was hoping that Erika, you would talk a little bit more about was the notion that when people talk to an Indigenous author or really just an Indigenous person, that they might be so concerned about, misusing a word or causing offense that maybe they don't say what's on their mind, or maybe they don't even initiate that conversation. And you kind of hinted, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you kind of hinted at just understanding that people make mistakes and the importance of context. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, number one, as somebody who is Indigenous, who's raised in the West, we're talking about East Coast tribes, we're talking about Puerto Rico. I was straight up told they don't exist. The Taino are dead. They don't exist. The East Coast tribes, anyone who claims that they're East Coast, they're a liar. They're not a real native. Anybody who's Black and Native, even though I grew up with a cousin who is Black and Native, if they say they're Native, that's not true. And I feel like I'm angry at myself and my environment for making those assumptions and like taking them in, even though I think I'm so open-minded. I think I'm so much better than that. So none of us are exempt here. None of us are exempt. I've seen, and Twitter, of course, is a fucking wasteland, because you'll see people be like, they'll be like, well, I'm Black. And, from what I understand, like all of the Native Americans own slaves. That's what I've heard. And I'm like, oh my God, no. That was just the Southeastern Native tribes. And they do, like, some of them have not, like the Cherokee Nation, they have taken accountability for that. Their citizens are Black, they are white, they are Native. It's all about like genealogy in their case. And do you have a family member on the rolls, including people who were enslaved, because the idea is that these people were a part of the culture, that blood doesn't matter, that blood is a sort of creepy European fiction, right? So they've just said we're inclusive in all these ways. Now, other tribes have not. Other tribes have not taken accountability, and they won't give what's called the freedmen full citizenship. So we're all culpable. We're all accountable. I don't mean to say it's all equal, whatever, because there are people who are malevolent, right? And we all know it. And you're like, oh, why would they say that? That's so cruel, right? Or sometimes if you say something and someone's like, I need to correct you, you can't weep afterwards and you can't get angry, right? I personally try to be like, okay, oops, I assumed a wrong thing. And I move on from that, right? Oh, I learned here. But what I don't want, what scares me a little bit, is this landscape of Twitter. And I guess I know Twitter's not the reason, it just happens to be the algorithms, the forum, the time. But it does seem to create a culture of like dragging people and, taking something out of context on purpose. Because I think for a while there, people would very rightly point out something like, oh, this was an egregious thing, let's not do it again. Or this person's an actual pedophile or something like this, right? Something terrible that should be called out, talked about, someone who sexually assaults, etc. But now it's just become this like, maybe I can make my career by garbaging someone. And I feel like, especially Indigenous people, we're just starting to make this thing that I've been waiting for 20 years. I've been writing articles for BuzzFeed, LitHub. I've been, making connections, reaching out to people, asking if they need things, right? Because I've wanted to see lots of different Indigenous voices at once. And there are people in our community who I feel like they don't want that. They want it to just be one voice. And they'll drag and drag and drag and drag and harass or punish people for just making a completely stupid mistake that they're willing to be like, oh, I learned here, I'm sorry. Gosh, I'll never do that again. And I hate that. I really hate that environment, because what it does is make people hesitant to publish us, put us on podcasts. And granted, yeah, there's some great Indigenous podcasts too. But you know what? For example, the horror community, it has lots of different people from lots of different places, all supporting each other. We're going to make mistakes. And what I like about it is we're all coming from different places and we're all having a conversation. So I don't want to see a situation where people are like, oh, I'm so afraid to make a mistake, I don't want to have an Indigenous person. Oh, I'm so afraid of their trolls, I don't want to have an Indigenous person. That is really a mess. I hope that we all just say no to that and like try to be sincere and educated as possible, right? And just say, I'm going to do this. I'm going to move forward with this person because I like their book and they're interesting. And you can tell I'm a professor because I'm so freaking long-winded. But anyway.
No, Erika, I like your book and you're interesting.
you don't have to worry about this show ever saying no to you because of a bunch of jackasses. Because apparently I got a "hey jackass, come at me" face, so it's all good. I did, before we start doing outros, I had to touch on the fact that White Horse was a Target book club book, and how, like, my wife loves Target. We go there, at least once a week, and the big screen behind I am assuming it's designed in the same in most Targets. It's like a book section. They got the toys for, I was gonna say for adults because it's not children's toys. They're like, do you guys know what I'm talking about? They're like horror action figures and stuff like that.
Oh, okay.
It's like Alien and Predator and all that.
It's like the nerdy toys, like all
nerd toys. Yeah.
Nerd toys. There you go.
I got some nerd toys too. I got Bubba Hotep right there and Walter White. But anyways, there's a big screen behind there, and I just one day I was too slow to get my phone and record. I wanted to send it to you, but there's this big ad for your book, and I was like, that's so fucking cool. And I go to my wife. I'm like, Tara, I know her. I talked to her. And then I saw your book in the book club section. And I just want to know, like, how does it feel? Because that's pretty cool in my eyes. And I'm guessing for E and Brennan too, because that's like a massive chain. And that means right off the bat, there's going to be thousands of people reading your book.
I never got to see that display. I'm so sad. I was touring. And then it was always like some Target far away from me. I'm so sad. So I got to see on TikTok. There's a Latinx book talker. Gosh, what does she call herself? Everyone has these kind of fancy names for themselves, and so it just makes me forget what their actual names are. But she's so cool and she's so neat. And she'd actually gone in Target and showed it, and it was super cool. But yeah, what it was something that, it was kind of like, I think because my book has a traditional structure, Target picked it. I, like I said, people can have the narratives they want, but what happened was I'm a Native American author who, had, like I said, this very kind of like well plotted out book. And so even though a horror book is not normally your book club book, it's why it was November's book of the month, right? It's why it was Good Morning America's like little buzz pick or whatever, because it had this kind of like very compelling traditional plotted structure. And so yeah, what happened was my editors were kind of hemming and hawing. They were kind of going back and forth about edits. And suddenly it was like, we accept these changes, let's go. And I was like, oh, what's happening? Like, can we have a Zoom? And I'm like, we can have a Zoom. And so they're like, your Target's, November book of the month pick. And I was like, holy shit. Because I also love Target. And I saw this like TikTok about how white women love Target. I'm like, you clearly do not know women of color, because every Indigenous or Black or Asian woman I know, and man, loves to just hang out in Target and buy shit. Everyone does.
Yeah.
Have I gone to Walmart? I have. Of course, I've gone to Walmart. I'll go to Walmart, even though it's god awful. They're all god awful. Corporations are god awful. Go communism. But everyone loves Target. It's fun. They're good at what they do. And of course, it was rad to see it in Target. Like, I actually bought a couple of the books, and I signed 6,800 what's called tip-in pages. My wrist was like going to hell. I had to ice it. And I sat there for hours every day listening to your podcast, to
oh wow,
Neil's podcast, everyone's podcast, just figuring out like what was out there, what were these podcasts, while I signed page after page. Luckily, I have a very fast signature, and then they, tip them in. And it's sad. I tried to order some of my own signed Target because they look different, and it didn't come. It wasn't, one was broken, the spine was broken, and then the other one wasn't signed up. But someone found them. Like, someone else was like, oh, I found a signed copy in Target. I'm like, God damn it, I want one of my own Target signed copies.
What was the page called? You said tip pages?
In.
Tip in. What's that?
It is literally as it sounds. Like, so when you have a book club, they'll buy a certain, chunk, and they'll send it to their book club, Target's book club. And I guess you sign up for Target's book club, which I didn't know about. And you sign like thousands of just individual pages, and then they send it into your publisher, and they tip it in to the book and seal it into the whole thing. Is that not wild? Yeah. So funny. I was on small presses all of my life. Okay, I have published books with small presses. I am like, I will get my own blurbs. I will do my own shit. Thank you. And so I sign all my tip-ins. I take them. They're like all these boxes. I take them to the UPS. And then about a month later, one of my editors is like, oh, are you ready to have them pick your boxes up now? And I'm like, ready to have, what do you mean? Macmillan just has someone to come by to pick them up. But I'm such a small press kid that I had no fucking idea. So I'd like carry them all myself to the USPS a month before that. Yeah.
Holy shit. I can't forget Robert Otone, friend of yours, and me and him are becoming buddies actually, and he showed me this really cool picture of you and him. He showed it to me today. You guys were in New York you were on your book tour, and there was I don't know her name. You have to name her, but there was also an editor, and I was just asking about it. That guy loves you. He's like, she's literally the best. So hard to disagree with that. Just shout out to Rob. He had a question, but we're actually running down now. I did want to ask about the last thing, which was Good Morning America. I don't want to not ask, how the hell was that?
That was surreal. And you know what, I had to like, now I suppose if I were like a Reese pick or a Jenna pick or whatever, which I don't think my protagonists are spunky enough for that, but a girl can dream. But they don't fly you in. So you have to do it yourself. And I had done it. And I thought I did a really good job. And they're like, no, try to do it another way, try to do it this way, that way. So I had spent all day just trying to get it right because it has to be like, I think it's 12 seconds. You have to do 12 seconds. You have to hold your book and it's a whole thing and you film it yourself. And I'm not a film guy, I'm a fucking writer. And so I did the second version of it. It took me all day. I was like, oh man, this is the jam. Like I got it. No, they went with one of the earlier ones. But it was still incredibly surreal to see yourself on Times Square in Good Morning America, and you could tell the people were like, "Wow!" Like you know how they have those host noises or host voices, and they were like, "Wow, yeah, sounds indigenous, horror, weird, wow," you know. You could tell they were like, "That's I will never read that." Yeah, you know, so but hopefully some people did, right? I think that was my highest Amazon score day, obviously. So
That's awesome. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. You can definitely tell when people kind of are just not on the same
it's like,
page.
what is this? What the hell? You know? So
Let's jump to what are you currently reading? We'll start with you, Erica, then E, then Brennan, then myself, or Brennan, if you want to go last, that's fine.
yeah, if anyone knows me, they know I love Grady Hendrix. I love Sylvie Moreno Garcia. I love their work. Grady could write a book every 2 weeks, and I just read Grady Hendrix right until one of us was dead. But actually, you know who I'm reading now? My Indigenous Brother from Another Mother, which is Stephen Graham Jones, because like I said, I have a conversation at Tattered Coven with him next week, and I'm reading the second in the something Witch Lake series they're calling it. Stacy something. Anyway, Don't Fear the Reaper is what I'm reading because I have a conversation with him, so I gotta fucking read it.
I get it now. Wow, I'm slow. He was talking about Blue Oyster Cult the other day on Twitter. That's fucking slow. Yeah. E.
Well, I am currently rereading White Horse. I got the book of the month copy, so I had to. I read this when I first got it, and I had been kind of skipping a lot of the book of the month picks for at least 7 months. And then I saw yours, and I immediately, the cover just rules. That's what drove me in first. And then reading the little blurb that they put and the little icons that kind of give you a hint of what's to come, I was like, oh yeah, I need that one. So thank you for breaking my dry spell with book of the month.
You are welcome. I freaking love Book of the Month. Isn't it cool?
It's very cool. I'm just like, I'm so picky, and I know I shouldn't be that picky because they have plenty of really good thrillers and mystery, but I'm just like, I don't know, something's got to really tickle my fancy. But as a whole, I think it's a really cool setup. So if there are any listeners that don't know what Book of the Month is, go look it up. It's fantastic.
I agree. It's like such a cool thing, and I know my grandmother had some version of it. I have to say, y'all, you have to read R.F. Kuang's Babel. I forgot that. I just finished that. It is mind-blowingly good. It honestly, I'm so jealous of her. She's 26 and a genius. I hate her. I love her.
How
So
do you
it's so good.
spell her name?
I believe, if I'm not saying it wrong, I believe that's right. I believe it's just RF Babel. But yeah, I've got it right. RF, the initials, Kuang. I believe Kwang. I'm probably murdering it in some way, but I think I'm largely right. Babel deserves everything it's getting. It is huge, and it's just a compulsive read. I just it's so good. It's a fantasy novel, but it's just oh god, it's so good. Dark academia vibes, as you know, people on TikTok would say.
That's pretty cool. Brennan, what are you currently reading?
Um, I have been working through Dennis Lehane's Kenzie and
Oh,
Gennaro series. I'm on number 2 right now. I read Gone Baby Gone years ago, and I'm gonna have to get back to that because it's like now I'm like deeply entrenched in these characters. And Erica, you had said earlier that like people who want to learn plot and structure should read these like crime writers, and I 100% agree with that. I would even add to it like the amount that some of these guys, Lehane being one of them, can achieve with dialogue is just the amount of character work with the inner monologue laced with the dialogue. It's just crazy. It's unmatched. I'm learning so much about how to write competently from this dude. And I am also reading Woe to Those Who Dwell on Earth. It is John Lynch's first short story collection. We will have him on next Monday to talk military horror, among other things. How about you, Patrick?
I actually just finished White Horse today. I loved it, by the way. But you want to talk about? He's from Massachusetts. An older crime writer, George V. Higgins, The Friends of Eddie Coyle, and Cogan's Trade, which ended up becoming I forget the title, but Brad Pitt and James Gandolfini's in it. It's like 2007 movie. And Ray Liotta's in it too. But yeah, you want to talk about a guy that can write really, really well. That I want to. We're gonna talk to Dennis in a couple months, and I want to hear what he has to say about that guy. Because if you don't read crime, and I guess if you're not from the area, maybe he's one of those names that maybe you don't even know who he is. But I'm going to be starting John Lynch's other book. I didn't have it written down. Can you help me out with it? It's the Splatterpunk Military.
No, I think I'd like to just watch you flounder. No, it's called The Warrior Retreat.
Thank you. Dead Air is not good, man. Well, it can be comical. So, yeah, I'm starting that one tomorrow. Where can people follow you, Erika? Where can people follow you?
Oh, on the Wasteland, otherwise known as Twitter. I am on the TikTok, awkwardly, middle-agedly dancing. I love Instagram, probably the best. It's all just ETWURTH, or actually, no, that's right. I've changed it to ERIKATWURTH. I might kill Twitter. I'm not on. I'm more of a viewer on TikTok than a somebody who posts. But Instagram is what I like the most, so that'll probably keep. So I would say if you want to find me on Instagram.
Awesome. E, where can people follow you?
Sure. Best spot is probably just my blog, and my name is spelled with a C instead of a K. But I have links to all the random social accounts I'm on. Because I've been so sick of Twitter, I've been really focusing my time on a phone app called Litzy. I don't know how many users there are, but it's like an Instagram, but specifically for bookish people. It's been around for a while.
I've never even heard of it.
I like it. I think it's really cool. It's way less glitchy than some of the newer social media phone apps that have come out recently. But I think it's interesting because you can add books to your book stack. You can add little reviews. You can add blurbs. Then you can add quotes. So depending on what your interest is, you've got some options. And you can also tap the title of a book and literally scroll through a feed that's just dedicated to that book. So something to check out if you guys want one more thing on your plates.
That sounds interesting. You can follow me at PR McDonough on Twitter. Instagram, you can follow the show at Dead Headspace. Brennan, where can people follow you?
Brennan LaFaro on most things. I am not on Litzy, but I may go on there because it sounds really cool. Yeah. And I am not on the TikTok, but pretty much everywhere else.
Erika, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I was going to say, join me, Brendan, on the TikTok for the awkward dancing. You should.
Yeah, you bring the music, I'll bring the dancing.
We'll do it. I guess final thoughts. I don't know. I hope I love horror literature. I love where it's going. It's fun. I love these conversations. You guys have been great. And I can't wait to be on with Brady Hendricks. As everyone knows, I think he's fabulous. And look, read Indigenous literature. Try not to read it because it's a check mark. Browse some of my articles. Google my name and see the articles that I've written and, be like, well, this one looks actually interesting to me. Not like, oh, I feel guilty. I should probably find the one that looks fun to read and read that one. And then maybe read another one. So that's what I guess I do have a final thought. And then the other final thought is thank you guys, because this has been wonderful. So.
E.
Well, yeah, I just want to say it was great to meet you. I know we've engaged a few times on Twitter, but it was just nice to be able to talk to you face to face virtually.
Yes, you too.
Brendan, I want to save you for last. My final thoughts are that it was a real pleasure talking to you. I wish everyone interacted like this, but you're never going to get that when there's too many people, especially you're not seeing their faces, seeing their interactions. I can't imagine most people would say something to a screen that they, as opposed to seeing the person. Because, like, you're like, hey, that's a real person. They have feelings, So I really do appreciate that you are being vulnerable with what you're allowing us to talk about. So for that, I appreciate it. For White Horse, I appreciate it. I hope people pick it up because it's a damn good book, and we just generally like talking to you. I'm gonna get to you in 1 second, Brennan. 2 episodes from now, like Erika mentioned, we are gonna have Erika return to talk to Grady Hendrix. We're probably not gonna do a lot of talking. It's just gonna be you and Grady for the most part, I'm sure. We love him too. I mean, the last book, the newest house, the How to Sell a Haunted House. I seriously think that it can stand on the same shelf as like Rosemary's Baby. It's really fucking good. Brennan, final thoughts, sir.
Yeah, echoing a lot of yours is I hope people will buy this book, read this book, enjoy this book. I absolutely dug it. And Erika, I can't wait to read what you've got coming out next. No pressure or anything like that. But now normally we do use final thoughts to say, hey, we enjoyed your company. You were awesome. We hope you come back. But I'm so psyched that we actually have, like that is already nailed down. We don't even have to like throw it out hypothetically, like, hey, see you in a couple weeks.
Yeah, no, I can't wait to come back, and I can't wait to talk with Grady. It's an extreme privilege. He's sort of like the superstar for me. And I will talk about what I'm on doing next. I just signed another contract with Flatiron for Room 904. So it was originally Psycho Mantium, but now that's Room 904. So.
All right, so book us for just have us booked for that one for the next book.
Yeah.
I laughed, but that was a serious comment.
You shouldn't have laughed.
I can't help it. I'm a goof. Next episode is 188. That's with that guy, John Lynch. He writes about military, splatterpunk military, but he focuses on military. There's a reason for that. He was in the military. We're going to talk all about that next week. And we are going to be joined by Kevin Whitten, a.k.a. Well Red Beard. You have seen his, if you watch the video version or audio version, you've heard his ad with Erika's White Horse ad. Probably a lot last season. So, as always, many choices in podcasts. Thank you for making us.